So since we're going to end with Hockey Canada, maybe we should start off talking about some better, well, not so much better hockey news, but the Oilers are still alive, even though we got.
Better, I don't know. You guys got blown out 6-1 last game, so the game card says, eh? That's not
Yeah,
great.
well, I heard some people talking about talking about winning game one or game two, and I'm like, hey, it only matters who wins the last game. So we still got games to go.
Listen, I saw the Maple Leafs get blown out 6-1 earlier in this playoffs, and you saw what happened to them. It's some strange premonitions there. And look, I
Please
think you
never
mentioned
compare
something
the
about
Oilers to the Maple Leafs again. The first round exit specialists, we're back to back in the Stanley Cup Finals. There's no comparison.
well,
Second
we'll
place
get there eventually.
Second place is first place losers, they say.
That's true. I remember Tiger Woods. He's talking about like, yeah, second place sucks or third place sucks worse though. So, you can always do worse.
Yeah, you can also
How,
have the perspective that second place is the first to lose, but
the NBA playoffs have been going on too, Noah. Have you been watching them a lot?
Yeah, and we got Pacers, Thunder, two small market teams, so it's not exactly breaking ratings records, but I'm quite enjoying it. We got like a really solid underdog story, so let's go for Tyrese Halliburton. Their NBA Twitter is calling him a terrorist. They're calling him the Halliban. So yeah, it's been pretty fun playoffs.
Yeah, it's hard enough for a
Yeah.
Canadian team to win in the NHL, and there's so many of them. Whereas in the NBA, of course, there's only one Canadian team. So who knows when the Raptors will win again?
But still a lot of Canadian players in the finals. We got Benedict Mathurin, Lou Dort. They're both from Quebec. Andrew Nemhard. I saw him play when I was 10. He was like 12. So yeah, some great Canadian talent there.
Think Montreal could ever get a team?
I don't think basketball's very popular in Quebec, but Vancouver, they had a team and it didn't really work out well. So I don't know. Maybe Calgary is a market that could sustain basketball. Who knows?
They've been calling for Montreal to get their baseball team back for decades, but yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Nope, not happening.
Anyways,
Olympic Stadium first.
We've talked enough about sports. Let's hop into this thing. Yeah, so starting off, guys, I wanted to kind of cover Canadian Taxpayer Federation's annual report card on all the provincial finance ministers. So depending on what province we're in, we might be surprised at the rating that our province got or surprised at the rating that some other provinces got. You can see the overall list right here. And among every provincial finance minister, not a single one got an A plus, or A minus. So I think that's the big takeaway. That kind of, the best mark's a B plus, which isn't terrible, don't get me wrong, but the majority of finance ministers got a failing grade, depending on, I'm not just talking about F, but I consider a D minus and a D a fail. If you go in school and you get a D, I'm pretty sure that's a fail. Like F is just worse, but you still fail. You need like a C plus to pass, from my understanding. So based on that, more finance ministers failed than passed, which is just ridiculous. And obviously, you guys are in different provinces too. So what were your key takeaways? Because Alberta, second place, hey, not the worst. We did some good things, but also some bad things. What did you guys take away?
Well, I'm an Ontarian, so when this article went up, I immediately scrolled down to where it says Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, and with no surprise whatsoever, he got a D minus. So you guys are eating a lot better in Alberta when it comes from a taxpayer's perspective. But yeah, the D minus for Bethlenfalvy is definitely deserved. A couple weeks ago, the Ontario Finance Minister tabled a budget showing that they're projecting a $14.7 billion deficit. This is not the federal government that has a tax base of 40 plus million people. This is a province that has a $14.7 billion deficit. Again, it's the biggest province in the country, and that there's a lot of people that you have to accommodate for, but this is a incredibly large deficit. They are ballooning the debt to the point where it is projected that in 2 years Ontario's total debt will reach $500 billion for a province. That is an insane amount of debt to have. And per person debt is set to reach 28,470 by the year's end, the highest in the nation. So Ontario's finances under a supposedly conservative government is getting worse and worse by the year. And this is because Premier Ford, he campaigned on a bunch of spending commitments during the election. Before the election, he sent every Ontarian a $200 checks just so you know what style of governance he's going to pursue. And then on the campaign trail, he promised tens of billions of dollars in expensive spending packages to combat the tariffs. But for all the spending that the Ford government has been doing, not just in this past fiscal year, but in the past 7.5 years, Ontario's unemployment rate is one of the worst in the country. It's over 8%, and it's rising every month. Canadians are still dealing with the cost of living crunch that inflation has caused over the past few years. Ontario has some of the worst housing markets in the country, specifically in the Greater Toronto area, where the average price of a home is over $1 million. So the Premier Ford's government hasn't really been doing anything to accommodate that. And then you table a budget that has no tax release whatsoever, but instead is ballooning debt. I think it's incredibly disappointing. A D minus is well warranted.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised that he didn't get an F, just from what I've seen as an outsider looking into Ontario. Of course, he did get an F in debt and spending increase. And just a quick word on spending increase. The spending increased in every single province across the nation compared to last year. So I really found that shocking that not a single province is saving money, essentially. And I don't know, though, at the same time, this might just be provinces feel so pressured to deal with all the problems caused by the federal government's immigration that they need to spend money, essentially, to help their provincial residents. What did you take away from this, Alex? Anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm here in BC. We've never really been known for financial management.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's not really a thing. Like, it's not really a big part of our reputation. I think we just had 4 credit downgrades in the last 4 years in BC. So I'd say that it's pretty fairly reflective of the actual financial situation here.
4 consecutive credit downgrades. But hey, we'll just keep spending more. The David Eby government specialty, right? It got them reelected. So what can you say?
And if you just look at the popularity of some of the premiers and look at the finance minister's corresponding grades, the correlation isn't great. For example, Wab Kinew, one of the most popular premiers in the entire country, his finance minister received a big fat F. You had the Ford government that was just elected for a third term. Their finance minister, as we said, Peter Bethlenfalvy, received a D minus. It looks like the Cackers might be thrown out by Quebecers in the next election. But even François Legault was elected for a second term, and his finance minister is receiving a D minus on this report. So I think a lot of Canadians have shifted their attention away from the provincial electoral scene and toward the federal electoral scene. Hence why they're not holding their provincial governments to account in the same way that perhaps they would during normal times. And that makes sense, with all the chaos in the last few months of Trudeau's tenure, and then Trudeau resigning, and we having a new prime minister, and then an election. A lot of Canadians just focus on the federal scene. I think this is the same thing with us. But now that we have the time to sort of settle down, we have some certainty and some stability on the federal electoral scene, Canadians are going to be turning their attention toward their provincial politics and the provincial finances, and they're going to recognize that it's not in a great state, and it's the case for most provinces in this country.
Yeah, interesting you say that, Noah. I never noticed that. The worst performing provincial finance minister on this report card from Manitoba, and Wab Kinew over the last few years, every single poll I've ever seen on provincial premiers and their favorability, he is the number 1 rated premier. In fact, a poll came out on Thursday from Angus Reid showing the newest favorability of the premiers. And again, Kinew was in first place, and his rating had gone up, not down. The only other premier who had a rating increase was Danielle Smith. All the other ones either were neutral, so they didn't change, or they went down.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a story for another day. So
but not to cut you off, like I saw a recent poll that showed that Premier Ford's popularity is on the increase. Like I think a recent provincial poll had the Ontario PCs at 49%, the Liberals at 28%, and like the NDP at like 14-15%. 49%, like Ford, like I've never seen that for the Ontario PCs in polling. This could be an outlier poll, but the fact that they're getting anywhere close to 49% in a hopefully legitimate public opinion poll is actually ridiculous to me. It's actually like I'm personally offended by that because I've been paying attention to what Ford has been doing, and he's not been doing a very great job. So let's hope Canadians are able to open their eyes, especially to the fiscal mismanagement that has been going on at Queen's Park.
Yeah, speaking of potentially not doing a great job, although I don't know if I'd go that far, uh, the Chief Justice had some very strong words, perhaps, for someone in his position, and maybe even could be seen as partisan type language. I mean, this is very, very strong language. Yeah, Noah, what did you think of what the Canada's Chief Justice had to say about Trump? Although I don't think his comments were directly targeted at Trump, but through implication or inference, it was clear enough who he was talking about.
Yeah, so Richard Wagner, every now and then he decides to go to the media and do an interview. If you recall, around the time or just after the Freedom Convoy had come to Ottawa and been moved out by the Trudeau government, Richard Wagner gave an interview and he said, "Oh, those truckers, they were disruptive," and he had only negative things to say about the truckers. And I think last year he also gave an interview that made some waves in the ways that you wouldn't want them to make from the Chief Justice. So again, he sits down for another interview and he's asked about the situation in the United States. And he implies that the United States is headed toward dictatorship, that the rule of law and judicial independence is under attack. Now, like you could have your criticisms of the Trump administration. You could criticize how they've responded to certain judicial rulings. But to say that Trump is a dictator after he was just democratically elected, to say that he's trying to become a dictator, after his government generally does comply with judicial orders, probably not in the most judicious and expeditious way as many people would like him to comply with these orders, but he still does it. And to say that they're going towards a autocratic, an autocracy, I think is quite ridiculous. Isaac, I know that you've held back your adjectives in describing Richard, but I will not. I will not hold back. I don't think he's doing quite a good job, especially because later on in the interview, he was asked about upholding the Supreme Court's traditions, and he said that to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Supreme Court, they're gonna go away from the iconic red and white robes that the Supreme Court has, sort of just stripping away a sort of a very long held tradition to, I guess, create robes that are more fitting of Canada's traditions, which is kind of like a bit of a conflict there if you're trying to think about that a bit with some sense. But also the Supreme Court, they put up a big statue of Richard Wagner in the lobby of the Supreme Court, which is not something you generally do while you're still serving on the court. You usually get your statue commissioned after you leave. And he said, the reporter asked, "Well, who purchased the statue for like who's the one that paid for it?" And Wagner said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know who commissioned the statue, but it's there, and I'd like see my face every time I walk in the door." So definitely not a very interview that flattered himself with conservatives or Canadians in general. What did you guys think of Richard Wagner's strange, eccentric interviews, especially his comments on autocracy in the United States?
Just quickly on the statue, that's, I think, ironic because if historically that's what dictators do, put statues of themselves everywhere. So
of course.
And I mean, good to see the irony here. But Alex, yeah, you're a crime reporter, so what did you think of that? And more importantly, perhaps just the importance of a Supreme Court justice and any judge for that matter, just remaining nonpartisan and kind of not sticking their nose where it doesn't belong.
Well, it's obviously a politicized comment, right? I mean, when Justin Trudeau was doing the same thing in Ottawa, and stomping peaceful protesters with horses, he really didn't seem to take exception to it. So, it's a shame to see a judge be so politicized that he isn't able to see things consistently and with principles, right? That's actually kind of I think a reasonable expectation of the public from their judges, right, is that they see things with some level of neutrality.
Absolutely. And, one of the most celebrated, lauded things about our Supreme Court is the supposed nonpartisan nature of our Supreme Court. I took a couple law classes in university, and one of the big things that my professors, lauds is, how fair and reasonable, and unlike the bad American Supreme Court that our court is like, and then you read these decisions like the Insight case, or the judges are saying, "Oh, well, you actually have to grant the safe injection site, Mr. Harper," and you have these cases where they're striking down mandatory minimum set laws. Very reasonable, moderate mandatory minimum laws that the court is striking down under Section 8. The prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. There's just so many decisions that are expressly political that I don't even have time to recite. But to imagine that the court is nonpartisan, it is a fantasy. And Richard Wagner himself is doing a great job in dispelling that illusion of tearing down the bricks of this conventional wisdom that has been developed by our Laurentian elites, that our Supreme Court is infallible, nonpartisan, and are just sort of like philosopher kings. Well, guess what? These are humans who actually have their own political beliefs, and their beliefs are just as objectionable as everyone else's. And we have the right to criticize them, and they should be criticized, because Wagner definitely has been acting in ways that have been politicized. And it's incumbent on our judges, especially the Chief Justice representing the court, to not engage in such tomfoolery.
Well,
Now, just
it's also a bit of a pay-to-play system too, right? I think I read somewhere that more than 50% of the judges in Canada aren't only Liberal voters; they're Liberal donors, right? Because we have our political parties appoint judges in Canada, right? So.
Yeah, and it's on the same beat. I mean, Alberta, for example, is one of the only provinces who has its own Senate election. But of course, the senators we elected were not selected to the Senate. Trudeau picked his own ideologues to stack the Senate with. But that's a different story. And before we get too
Good thing
deep
they
into the
can't do
weeds here,
anything.
yeah,
Or don't do
move
anything.
on to a different part of politics, which for me, this was an absolutely shocking poll, which suggested quite heavily that Canada's moving towards a two-party system because the NDP is they're done based on this poll. So basically, this Angus Reid Institute poll showed that only 13% of respondents would definitely consider supporting NDP in the future, whereas 41% said there was absolutely no way they would ever support the NDP in the future. And there's a lot to break down in this poll, but a few interesting things. Younger Canadians were much more optimistic about the NDP, whereas Canadians above the age of 35 were essentially much more pessimistic and thought the party's best days were behind them. And then we also saw something for past NDP voters and which parties they went to. For example, less than 1% of those who voted Conservative would vote NDP in the future. Perhaps not surprising, but that number rises to 18% among Liberals because the Liberal Party absorbed so many NDP voters. But as for the voters that they absorbed, I mean, so many of them are saying they're not going back. For example, so 51%, this is 51% of past NDP voters who voted Liberal did so just for so that the Conservatives would lose. So that's not great. And honestly, arguably the main reason the Conservatives lost the federal election was that so many NDP voters left that party to vote Liberals. If they had stuck with the NDP, the Conservatives likely would have won the election because there would have been a bigger vote split. But also generally, just 47% of past NDP voters believed that the party's future is bright, whereas 28% in total say that the best days are behind it. And then there was a bunch of stuff on Singh and his performance, which was split. But yeah, what do you guys think about the NDP's future? I mean, how long will it take for the party to recover federally?
Yeah, I think that the NDP, they're definitely in a dire position. Now, this is perhaps the NDP being artificially underestimated because they had an incredibly unpopular leader and currently an interim leader. So perhaps if they have someone who's just so much more competent than Singh, a Jack Layton esque leader, that they can revive the party's chances. And like at the end of the day, the NDP does have a decent amount of name recognition amongst the Canadian public, and with some competent leadership, with some incompetence from the Liberals, they could definitely bring their support up, especially if you look at, say, provinces like Manitoba, where the NDP is actually quite popular on a provincial level. In British Columbia, it's the same thing. In Alberta, the NDP, they're still the clear number two party to the UCP, but they still poll in the 30s and 40s provincially. It's not like this is a rump party, in a one party province or whatever. But you look in Saskatchewan, the NDP made great gains in the last provincial election last year. So the NDP, they're still a relevant force, at least on the provincial level. It's just that the federal party has been ran so incompetently in the past few years that people have a very negative view of the NDP, the federal NDP. They associate with Singh and all of his just incompetence and his like faux radicalism, but also like his champagne socialism. It's like this is the image that the NDP is associated with, and you sort of had Charlie Angus complaining about that in the media earlier this week. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be very, very hard for the NDP, especially since they are not they don't have official party status, so they do not get money from the parliament for each vote that they got in the election. They don't have that privilege, so they're going to have to work really hard to rebuild their already battered party finances. But I'm curious about you, Alex, because you're in British Columbia. Do you feel like since the British Columbia is the British Columbia NDP is a powerful political party, do you feel like that will correspond to perhaps the federal NDP becoming a relevant force in British Columbia again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the NDP still has a lot of good faith support here in BC. I'm speaking on behalf of True North's leftard correspondent here in BC. Am I allowed to say that?
The
We might have to
leftist
cut that out. Yeah, I mean, people here still kind of like the NDP, and I don't take these polls too seriously, especially in between elections, because I find party loyalty in Canada is pretty dynamic. It's not like in the United States, right, where you have generational Republicans and Democrats. People here have very little loyalty to whoever they're voting for, and yeah, typically they'll vote for whoever they think has the most compelling party leader, whoever that happens to be. I also think with Trudeau moving so far to the left, it kind of rendered the NDP meaningless as a political party. But now, as we're seeing Carney move the Liberals back to the center a little bit, I mean, it's probably too early to tell, but it appears that way, then it starts to make the NDP look more appealing to people on the left, I would say. So I expect those numbers to change.
But just to piggyback off of that, even like despite Mark Carney's pivot to the center relative to Justin Trudeau, who is so far left that it's hard to even conceptualize the current political dynamic right now. But Carney bringing the Liberals back to the center did not really boost the NDP in any sort of way. Actually, they plummeted to like 6% in the last election, despite sort of optimal ideological circumstances. So something I've been pondering recently in the past few years is Canada just moving to a two-party system, or at least a system in which having a third party that could win elections is just unsustainable. Now, the NDP has never really been that. It's really always been the Liberals and Conservatives, but they've managed to gain official opposition status in 2011. They've had sizable parliamentary caucuses, but if you look in, say, Alberta, the Alberta Liberal Party died, so now it's a two-party state there with the Conservatives NDP. And BC, it's the Liberals and the Conservatives and the NDP. They couldn't sustain themselves. The Liberals had to die. The Conservatives had to rise up, and that's a two-party province. It's the same thing in Manitoba. It's the same thing in Saskatchewan. Ontario is a bit different, But if you look at a lot of the Atlantic provinces, there are two-party races. So you're kind of seeing this sort of realignment on the provincial side of politics sort of happen in federal politics. And if this is a long-term trend in which just having a third party, to the liberals or conservatives is unsustainable, that causes that that means there's some real political trouble for the federal NDP if their party's just not relevant anymore.
Yeah, I think that one of the most brilliant things that the Carney campaign did in the last election was not show their cards, right? Like this kind of rightward lurched back to the center of the Liberal Party. We're really seeing it post-election. We didn't see it so much during the campaign. A lot of major social issues, we had no idea what Mark Carney's opinions were on them during the election. In fact, we still don't. Safe supply comes to mind, transgender issues. It's Pride Month.
Bail
In
reform.
June. He's barely mentioned it at all, which is actually kind of a refreshing change from the rainbow hysteria that we went through with Justin Trudeau for the better part of the last decade. So, yeah, I mean, in a country where most people are generally very politically apathetic, there are a few things quite as attractive as a politician people know nothing about, right? And that's really kind of what I think was the linchpin of Mark Carney's campaign and why he was so successful. But now, as he's moving further to the center, I think that it starts to make the NDP look attractive again to people who are more have leftist sensibilities, let's say.
It's a decent theory, and I think we'll have to wait and see. But moving on to our next story here, Alex, for any listeners who might be familiar with To Catch a Predator, the Ontario Police Force, if I'm correct, was doing a similar thing or a similar method to catch what was it, child predators, or what's the situation here, Alex?
Yeah, so as I understand it from the police statements, they did what they call a child luring probe or mega sting. And so they posed as children online, very similar to the old Chris Hansen show to Catch a Predator that was formerly on Dateline NBC. I think they went on to internet chat rooms and they tried to lure it was all men, of course, to come meet kids, and then they would arrest them. It's really what I find fascinating about this story is that they were able to arrest and charge 36 people in only 2 weeks. So this actually brings rise to a few questions for me. Number one, why didn't they do this earlier? The whole creep catchers phenomenon, again, it's better part of a decade that it's been going on. And actually, police organizations were criticizing these online vigilante groups that were doing exactly what the police ended up doing and were incredibly successful at in a very short amount of time. So that's really my main question. Why didn't they do this earlier? Why aren't they doing it more often? But kudos to them for doing it at all.
Yeah, that's my question too, Alex. I think, well, myself and probably other people who watched To Catch a Predator just assumed by watching that like the big police organizations like FBI level would be doing things like this. Like, oh, that's just what they do. Of course, that's what they do. And you assumed like that this was already happening. So I'm just so surprised that you're saying that this is like a new thing and it hasn't been ongoing the last like few decades, because I was under the assumption that it would have been.
Well, I assume that they do a little bit of it, but I mean, this big on this level of scale is quite impressive, and it apparently required cooperation between over 20 different policing organizations. So I think that's one of the issues too, right? Is jurisdictionally, it might be hard to work together. But again, I'm just happy that they're doing it. Sorry, go ahead, Noah.
No, but it's like these police agencies, they're not really doing their job when it comes to dealing with potential pedophiles, and so you have this sort of gap in the law enforcement market almost. So you have these ordinary citizens going up and creating a YouTube channel where the whole premise is that they create these videos where they catch these quote unquote predators. They you see, if you can find this content quite often on YouTube. Not and Chris Hansen is actually doing it on YouTube too. But you have like a bunch of other spin-off YouTube channels where you have people who conduct very similar sting operations. So there's a clear like gap in the market, law enforcement market for getting rid of these predators off from our streets. And I have a younger sister who's like 10 years younger than I want to make sure that when she walks to school or she goes to play at the park, that she's safe and we don't have to worry about potential predators roaming around. So if the police did a better job and conducted these operations more often, I think a lot of parents would feel better about sending their kids off to do X, Y, and Z, sort of like how parents used to do it in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that.
Well, I think one of the more disturbing things about this case too is that it's not when they're walking to school that's the most dangerous place now. It's in the home, right? Because these predators were all online, right? So the predator is now in your home essentially, and so I think that that's a sobering reminder to
Mhm.
parents that you shouldn't just trust your kids to parent themselves on the internet, because the predators are prolific and there's a lot of them.
Yeah, and just to add one more point, like it's really important that it's law enforcement, conducting these sting operations, not necessarily like YouTubers, because like at the end of the day, like YouTubers, they might be doing it for the right reasons, but they're probably doing it for the fame, attention, and the money. And so they get into it for the wrong reasons, and you see some of these videos where they're just like beating up people, perhaps, or like they're catching a predator, but the actual predator they're catching is someone who's like severely autistic or like has like Down syndrome, and like like and then they're just like assaulting a person who's like autistic, and it's like it just feels like really weird. Like it's best that we actually like leave this to actual law enforcement authorities who can conduct these operations properly instead of chasing money and clout.
But of course, the effectiveness of these programs lives and dies in the courts, right? So I think one of the things people are really upset about is that when they did the release, 34 out of the 36 had already been released from custody by the time that they had announced this to the public. Now it's 33. One of them has been remanded after 2 new charges, which I just wrote about yesterday. So
Yeah, I'm sure they'll all be recharged because they'll just commit crimes again, as we've seen with this catch and release policy. I mean, it's the same people committing the crimes over and over again, and they just keep getting let out. So really, at this point, it's like the RCMP, for example, like I was talking about, if they did this cross jurisdictionally and they're doing all this stuff just for these people to be released, it's like, what's the point? That's what I keep seeing these police organizations say. What do you want us to do? We arrest these people, they're out the next day. Like, what do you want us to do? I mean, they're in a terrible situation.
it sends a really bad message too, right? Because there is such a thing as sex tourists, right? So if Canada has a lax criminal justice system, especially when it comes to pedophiles, then we become a safe zone for sex tourists, right? And that's obviously not what we want if we want to keep our kids safe. So I implore everybody to put pressure on their local judges and to keep track of what they're doing. And I think that's the best way that we can change the system.
Wow, we're really kicking off the weekend on a dark note, eh?
Well,
Yeah, and
I mean, to
sticking
solve
with
problems, you have to understand them, right? So
sticking with the sex theme, sort of, Alex, you, for those who don't know, Alex has been sort of participating in the Hockey Canada trial, so he knows what's going on. And we're reaching the end stages of this because, if I'm correct, the defense recently presented all of their arguments, and now the Crown is going to be presenting their arguments. So, yeah, what have you taken away from this trial so far, Alex?
so many things. It's a bizarre trial, for so many reasons. I think one of the most stomach churning things about this trial is putting it into the context of what we were just talking about. The fact that we have this revolving door justice system for predators and monsters. And here we are. I assume that this case cost the Ontario Prosecution Services well over $1 million to investigate and then put on trial a 19-year-old getting well, I guess he'd be 26 now, but we're putting him on trial for a quote unquote blowy in a hotel room 7 years ago. I don't know. I don't know if this ever should have gone to trial. At the same time, I also understand the spirit of believing victims, of course. And so I will stop short of saying that it shouldn't have gone to trial. I just question maybe the priorities of the prosecutors, given how many other people are seeing their charges dropped due to what the Ontario Prosecution Services says is a lack of resources.
Yeah, no, I understand the contrast in what you're saying, wherein these players are getting put through this public trial, this huge trial, whereas, as we just talked about, child predators are literally let out of bail on bail the next day. I mean, this is crazy. Yeah, Noah, have you paid attention to the Hockey Canada trial at all?
I've been paying attention to it in passing, but what really, stands out to me is that, every time I walk by my grandma, who's watching the 6 o'clock news, you get another update on the Hockey Canada trial. And it feels like I've been hearing about this for years because I have been hearing about it for years. It's been so long. Yeah, as you said, this is an incident that happened 7 years ago. And it's really frustrating for the victims and the accused to not receive a verdict on this. I know there were some complications in the trial that just couldn't be helped. But when you're waiting, years upon years for a verdict, it takes a toll on you, especially if you're, the potential victim and you have to go up on the stand multiple times and you have to, have this in the news cycle over and over again. And if you're, the hockey players and even and especially if you're innocent and you have to be dragged through the mud for years upon years and have your name in newspaper headlines and stuff like that. It must be really tough, especially on them and their families. I wouldn't really wish it on anyone. I think for the benefit of everyone, it's best we get this over with as quickly as possible. I know there'll be another month until we hear a verdict, so let's hope that's a quick and speedy month. And let's get this over with. I think it's best for the nation that we don't dwell on this for another year.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that just quickly, because even if everyone in this trial is innocent and that's the case, I mean, the emotional toll that they would have had to gone through over these 7 years, they are paying a severe price for that in itself, like charges aside, that enough in itself. But I mean, that's the saying, the wheels of justice churn slowly, right? Anyways, Alex, yeah,
if I can
from
just
what I
add one
understand,
thing about that headline for that story, because that was a quotation from Daniel Brand, who is the lawyer for Alex Formanton, who said she just wants money. My feelings on this trial have evolved over time. So just looking at it holistically, I don't believe that that's actually the case at all. I think it's a rather audacious claim because she already settled a civil suit with Hockey Canada in 2022. The defendant, or sorry, not the defendant, the complainant, who's identified as EM in this case, really has nothing to gain from doing this other than feeling understood. So I think that some of the claims that the defense lawyers have made and some of the arguments that they've made have been, I think, damaging to. I just don't find them convincing. I'll just leave it at that. At the same time, does any of the behavior that is being alleged occurred here, does it pass a bar of criminality? I find that nebulous as well. So this returns me to my original point. Why are we even doing this? Right? Like I think at the heart of the matter is that you have two different movements. You have this Me Too movement, right? Which is, and I understand the spirit of it, like completely and genuinely, the idea that you should believe all sexual assault survivors, because frankly, like people just don't falsely report sexual assault that often. I mean, even the statistics that show it happens relatively often. I think the highest I've ever seen is 2 to 8% of accusations are false. That's high enough, right? If it ruins somebody's life, I mean, if 1 out of 50's lives are being ruined, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. But I just don't think that it's this really common thing that happens, that people are falsely accusing others to destroy their lives. So I get the Me Too movement of believing all survivors, but it runs headlong into the presumption of innocence. Right? These two concepts can't possibly coexist. Right? They're mutually untenable. And so I think that in a way, this trial maybe is a good thing because it will remove some of the ambiguities that we have regarding that conflict of interest, and as well as some of the ambiguities surrounding consent generally.
yeah, that's something just quickly to touch on that I've always struggled with was, of course, we learn from a child that innocent until proven guilty. This is a core value in our society, and yet I don't feel that sports in general encompass this very well. Like we see these people get accused of things that in no way are proven yet, and they're kicked off the team or whatever. They have to be put through the ringer. So, like you said, these two things can't be true at once. Uh, just quickly, if you want to, this is up to you because obviously it's just your opinion. But obviously, we're going to hear the verdict, I think, in about a month. What do you expect the judge is going to come back with?
So first of all, I'm happy that it's going to be trial by judge. And the reason that I'm happy for that is that when you get a jury verdict, you just get the verdict. There's never an explanation that comes along with it. And in a trial like this, where I think there is a genuine public interest in removing ambiguity around consent, I think it will be helpful to have the judge give their reasons for the decision. Based off of the evidence I've seen, and I'm not a legal expert, this is actually the first sexual assault trial I've ever covered. So I would take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I could foresee a situation in which, so all of the players have been charged with one count of sexual assault, and one player, Michael McLeod, who was the player who invited the other men into the hotel room, he is charged with an additional count of party to an offense. So I could foresee this bizarre outcome happening where he would be guilty of party of an offense, but not guilty of sexual assault along with the other 5 players, which then obviously brings rise to the question of, well, what is the offense?
Yeah.
Now, I saw this during the Coots trial, obviously a very different trial, very different circumstances, but they were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and possessions of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. The jury came back with not guilty on conspiracy to commit murder, but guilty on possession of a weapons for a dangerous purpose, which brought rise to the question, well, what is the dangerous purpose? Right. So these things do happen. And I think that there is kind of some pressure on the judge to impart justice in some capacity. So yeah, I don't think it's beyond the bounds of believability that everybody will be acquitted on the sexual assault charges and that McLeod will be guilty on the party to an offense, and we're all left a little befuddled and confused.
Yeah, do you think this pressures the judge in any way because they might be thinking this is going to set some sort of precedent going forward in cases like this? Like, do you think they feel that pressure because they're really, I don't know, building the framework for future trials here?
I imagine so. I've looked into some of the case history in previous trials by judge involving this judge, and she is a very competent judge, also a very kind person from my perception, having watched the trial, and somebody who really has an understanding and an appreciation for the presumption of innocence and not rendering a guilty verdict unless she's convinced beyond all reasonable doubt. So to answer your question, is there pressure for her to establish some type of precedent? I believe that there is, and I think that it is and possibly does pass the bar of illegality. I think it's certainly immoral to have consensual sex with a girl and then when she goes to the bathroom, invite all of your friends in. I think that may actually qualify as an offense. It's a pretty unique situation. I can't really foresee too many circumstances in which that would ever happen. But yeah, I mean, if she feels compelled morally, then I could see her wanting to establish a precedent there, because I think that behavior is wrong and we should call it out as such.
And my prediction's whatever Alex's is.
Yeah, no, I was going to give you the final word. That's it, eh?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, I'd like to thank my colleagues Noah Jarvis and Alex Zoltan. Just remember, everything you heard today was off the record.
Awesome.
Say that more often. That'll make it a lot easier to do off the record. Just whatever Alex says, I agree. Yeah.
It's a weird case, man. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited. I mean, for the organization that you got to be on the case. I think that's awesome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I was excited that they let me do it.
Like I wasn't sure if they would. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Especially because you kind of came in halfway through, right?
I did. I missed.
You weren't there from the start,
which I'm really bummed actually that I missed it. And I don't know if I said it on the show. I wish I did if I missed it. But she is a very credible witness. Like she is not self-victimizing. She's not sensationalizing, and she's actually taken accountability a bunch of times. Said like, "Oh, this is kind of my fault too." So I think what we're dealing with is that like society itself doesn't know what the lines of consent are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What sort of like ruling do you want the judge to come back with on the consent issue?
I think that he should be guilty of party to an offense.
But
I know that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm also kind of try to make like a people pleaser, everybody happy kind of person generally.
But what sort of jurisprudence do you want the judge to establish regarding like what qualifies as consent?
So what it is, so you could say, I think the charge party to an offense doesn't capture what he did wrong, But she, based off of the evidence that I can see, certainly did not consent to all of these men coming into the room. So it could even be the offense you could say could be voyeurism, right? Because she was naked and he invited all these men into the room to basically gawk at her and tell her to masturbate on the floor. And we don't need a voyeurism charge successful against any of the men in order to establish that as a potential offense, right? Right. That would be a whole other trial. But yeah, I think like that was definitely wrong. And there's I haven't seen any evidence that convinces me in any way that she agreed to having all those men come in. Once they came in, she says she went into autopilot and was goading
Yeah,
them.
that's the thing, because she definitely at least feigned consent when they were there, right? But she didn't consent to them coming in the room. So there's two things. That's the weird thing, right?
Yeah, and like I'm absolutely certain that she did say like, "Are you pussies gonna fuck me?" and everything. But you know what? People get drunk and they have too much fun sometimes, and like whatever, it is what it is. And she takes accountability for that, right? Like she's not.
The other thing was, I was reading one of your articles. Didn't you say like she was in some way pressured to bring this suit forward by her parents or something like that? That's a consideration too.
Yeah, so she had a boyfriend at the time. So her mother
Mm.
was the one who originally went to the police, and then her father-in-law was kind of pressuring her, and that actually came up as well in cross-examination, where they said they characterized her as a people pleaser, and they said like, "Are you just doing this to make your family happy?"
Mm.
And she said, "Yeah, that's possible."
She
So
said that.
yeah,
Oh.
she often says, "Yeah, that's possible," which has been really damaging to her case. Right, they've kind of like taken, and that's
Really?
the other thing that's interesting too, is that you have 5 really high paid and like highly competent defense lawyers, so it's like a 5-on-1.
The best of the best, yeah.
Yeah, it's the best of the best, and so that's why I'm quite sympathetic now. Like at first I thought that the defendants were all innocent for sure, and as the trial has progressed, I've felt less and less that that's the case.
Would you say that's comparable to like the OJ trial? Like they just have stacked lawyers, and
Yeah.
I don't know what is her lawyer comparable to that or no?
Yeah, I would say that is a good comparison. Or like the Coots one again would be another example where like all of the Crown had all of the good lawyers, right? And the Coots guys were kind of like out in the lurch. This is
What about her lawyer though? Is are they any good?
Yeah, very good, very competent. But it's like playing speed chess against 5 people, right? Because all of those defense lawyers are
Magnus Carlsen can beat like 500 people at once, but yeah.
Yeah, but like they all have their own arguments, they all have their own theories,
Yeah.
and so you're playing like 5 different games at once, and that can't possibly be easy. It's been a real uphill battle for her as well, given that almost all the evidence is witness testimony from a drunk night 7 years ago. Right? Like, how are you going to prove anything beyond all reasonable doubt when that's all the evidence you have?
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, so I think that she's performed, like, regardless of the outcome, I think she performed really admirably. But do I think this should have gone to trial? No, not really. No.
Well, you'll be our resource on that, for the rest of the trial.
I'm glad. Yeah, I also find it interesting how uninteresting it is. Like everybody thought there was this big raucous gangbang, but like a couple of guys got like 30-second blowjobs, and 2 guys got like laid in the bathroom. And it doesn't sound like any of them were. Well, actually, came up in court. None of them were particularly good performers.
Short and sweet, eh? That's what you mean?
Right. It was supposed to be a.
Well, dude, there's 4 guys watching. There's a bit of pressure too, right? Like
it really was just teenagers awkwardly exploring their sexuality. Like the goalie, for instance, he was getting a blowjob for like 30 seconds, and he's like, "I actually made eye contact with one of the guys in the room, so I like lost my erection."
Of course,
right? It's like it's not like pornography, like a big raucous gangbang or anything, right? Like this is it was pretty lame. Like the details. I shouldn't use that word. I mean, there's a better word I could use, I'm sure. It was pretty vanilla and like awkward.
And yeah, do you think on July 27th or whatever, when the verdict is, like, how big do you think that news will be? I guess it depends on the
I think it'll be a nothing burger, because even if like he gets guilty on that one count, party to an offense, I don't think there is a mandatory minimum. Sexual assault there is, right? Like I think it was
really,
it's like 5 years prison time or something. But party to an offense, I think that
$500 fine, like after
like a couple like 2 weeks of community service.
Ridiculous. After
the bigger news story,
$500 fine.
The bigger news story will be if somebody signs one of the players. That's because the Canadians care more.
But like I was just saying about the sports thing, you're innocent until proven guilty. Not only that, these people are innocent, like proven innocent, and then they can't get signed. That would be bullshit. I would
I
be
think
so
that will
mad
happen.
if I were in
yeah.
their shoes. Like, I went through 7-year goddamn trial, proved myself innocent, and you won't sign me. Crazy.
Yeah.
They worked their whole lives to be in the NHL. This is no like small feat.
Yeah,
For sure.
that is very true. I wonder, yeah, like, because really the government has no place in telling people what two consenting adults can and cannot do. But yeah, I don't know. At the same time, I think, yeah, inviting 5 people, well, it was like 10 people at one point. Mind you, this is also important detail. Most of them came in because they wanted pizza.
Mm.
Which, if you know, like, I think we're all young enough to remember, like, what it was like to be a 19-year-old boy. Pizza is a very compelling reason to do anything. It still is, as far as I'm
Yeah, man. If
concerned.
you got, I'm there.
Yeah.
I just gotta double check the rooms I'm going into, I guess.
So this one player, the splits guy, I mean, as far as I'm aware, he just came in for pizza, and everyone was like, "Do the splits, footer," and he did the splits over, and he walked out. And
7
like
years on trial for that. Damn.
7 years, like his whole career is over.
Yeah.
That's so crazy to me.